Patton's Ghost Army. How inflatable tanks fooled the Wehrmacht, Operation Fortitude. In the spring of 1944, an English farmer witnessed the strangest tragedy of World War II. His bull, old and grumpy, decided to headbutt an American Sherman tank that had somehow appeared in his field overnight. The farmer closed his eyes, waiting for the dull thud of hooves against steel. But instead of a metallic clang, he heard a hiss. The tank deflated. This wasn't a scene from a comedy sketch. This was real, and that farmer had just stumbled upon one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. This was one of the most brilliant and insane deceptions in military history, Operation Quicksilver. The Ghost Army, a hand-picked unit of just over 1,100 men who collectively saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 American lives. Invented by Hollywood geniuses, British spies, and a handful of artists. Today you'll learn how inflatable rubber toys, a few speakers, and one angry bull tricked Hitler into thinking Patton's army would land in the wrong place. And how this lie helped win the war. Part 1. The problem. Where to strike. By early 1944, the Allies had a massive problem. Everyone was waiting for the invasion of Europe. Churchill, Roosevelt, and especially Stalin. But they had to choose the perfect spot. The Germans had built the Atlantic Wall, a coastline studded with concrete dragon's teeth, machine gun nests, and mines. The Nazis had poured millions of tons of concrete into fortifications stretching from Norway to the Spanish border. The most logical target was Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, just 21 miles of open water. France was practically a stone's throw away. But the Germans knew that too. They had the 15th Army there, with their best panzer divisions, including the elite Panzer Group West. Hitting Calais would mean drowning in blood within hours. That left Normandy. The beaches were wider, the defenses were lighter, but the logistics were a nightmare. The Allies would have to cross over 100 miles of open sea. The chance was that the Germans didn't expect an invasion there. But here's the catch. If Hitler realized Normandy was the main attack, he'd rush his panzers from Calais. An Operation Overlord would choke in the swamps on day one. They needed to make the Germans believe that Normandy was a fake, a diversion, and that the main blow, commanded by the general Hitler feared most, would come from nobody. That general was George Patton, old blood and guts. The Germans were terrified of his aggressive, blitzkrieg-style combat. He was, in their eyes, the most dangerous American on the battlefield. But Patton was in disgrace. After slapping an exhausted soldier in a field hospital in Sicily, he'd been sidelined. He was sitting in England, bored, furious, and hungry for glory. And British intelligence decided to make him the face of a fake army. As one MI5 officer later put it, we needed a bogeyman the Germans would believe in. Patton was perfect. He was already famous. He was already feared. And he was already doing nothing. Part 2. Creating FUSAC, the first U.S. Army group. The Allied command came up with a crazy idea. Create the first U.S. Army group. Sounds impressive, right? FUSAC. On paper, it was 500,000 soldiers and 11 divisions. In reality, there was nothing. An empty field and a couple of tents. The unit in charge of this theatrical madness was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. It had an average IQ of 119, one of the highest in the entire U.S. Army. These weren't typical grunts. They were artists, architects, set designers, sound engineers, and advertising copywriters. Patton's mission: make the enemy believe his army was preparing to invade through Dover, straight at Pas-de-Calais. And so began the greatest theatrical performance in military history. Number 1, the Rubber Miracle. They brought in set designers from Shepperton Studios, the same people who built horror movie sets for Alfred Hitchcock. They started building an army. They inflated hundreds of Sherman tanks, artillery pieces, and fighter planes. Each 93-pound dummy tank looked identical to the real thing from 8,000 feet up, the standard altitude of German reconnaissance planes. Inside, just pipes and barrels. Outside, rubber and paint. The artists painted fake weld seams, exhaust stains, even chipped mud on the rubber hulls. They moved them at night. By morning, German pilots would see, good God, an empty field is now full of tanks. Bernie Bluestein, a 19-year-old art student who joined the unit, later recalled, they looked so real. But the equipment was just part of it. We circulated in the saloons and cafes at dusk, letting locals know we were the real troops. The tanks were just part of the visual effect. And one morning, as you already heard, a bull headbutt one of these tanks. The sun had warmed up the rubber, and the animal wanted to scratch itself. Result: one deflated tank and one very confused farmer. The British thought it was hilarious. The Americans, not so much. Number 2, the magic of sound. Visual effects weren't enough. An army has to make noise. The Americans had a top-secret unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, nicknamed the Ghost Army, a name it earned only decades later. During the war, it was so secret that soldiers weren't even allowed to tell their wives what they really did. They had trucks loaded with massive speakers, the Sonic KS, mounted on half-tracks. They had recorded the sounds of tank columns, hundreds of roaring engines, clanking tracks, and sergeants cursing. The recordings weren't just noise. They were carefully orchestrated audio dramas, designed to mimic specific units. A German intelligence officer listening to the same radio frequency for weeks would hear the same personalities on the key. At night, they'd drive to within a few hundred yards of the front lines and crank up the volume. German listening posts reported, "We hear a mechanized division advancing." In reality, 40 men with a speaker were pretending to be 10,000. Number 3, the web of lies. And most importantly, intelligence. The British had a network of turned spies called the double-cross system. It was so effective that by 1944, virtually every German spy in Britain was actually working for MI5. The star actor was a Spaniard codenamed GARBO. His real name was Juan Pujol García, a chicken farmer who had dropped out of high school. The Germans thought he was their super agent in Britain. They paid him a fortune. In reality, GARBO worked for MI5, and British screenwriters wrote all his reports. His MI5 handler, Thomas Harris, later wrote, "GARBO's reports formed the backbone of all German intelligence appreciation on which vital operational decisions were taken." So GARBO leaks top-secret information. Quote, "Patton has massive forces in Kent. Tanks, troops, everything is serious. Expect the attack at Calais." He even invented 27 fictional subagents, including a drunken RAF officer in Glasgow, a cave-dwelling waiter from Gibraltar, and a Venezuelan obsessive-compulsive codenamed Moonbeam. All of them filed expenses. All of them were completely made up. A second agent, Brutus, a Polish pilot, adds, "I've seen the fusag patches on soldiers' uniforms with my own eyes." Patton is ready. The Germans swallowed it like fish. They thought they had a brilliant spy network. In reality, the scripts were coming from a London office. GARBO was so convincing that he received the German Iron Cross, personally approved by Hitler. He also received an MBE from the British. He remains the only person in history to be decorated by both sides for the same war. Part 3. Special effects, boats, and dolls. But to convince Hitler that Patton was sailing for Calais, they had to show naval invasion preparations. In the ports of Dover and along the River Thames, the Allies cobbled together a fleet of fake landing craft. These big bobs were made from water pipes, old canvas, and empty oil drums. Each one cost a fraction of a real landing ship, but looked identical from the air. When a German reconnaissance plane flew over, they looked like an armada. Thousands of ships that didn't exist. They even built a fake oil terminal in Dover, complete with storage tanks, pipelines, and a fake refinery tower. King George VI and Churchill came to open it in a carefully staged ceremony. The king cut the ribbon, posed for photos. The next morning, those photos were in Berlin. Look, the king himself opened an oil terminal at Dover. That's where the main attack will be. Special effect, Ruperts. A few hours before the Normandy landings, they dropped dolls over Calais. British paratrooper dummies named Ruperts, part of a broader deception called Operation Titanic. They were life-sized, wore uniforms, and were made from burlap and sawdust. Each Rupert carried recordings of gunfire and exploding mortars. When they landed, time-delayed blank cartridges went off inside them, creating the illusion of an intense firefight. Small teams of real SAS soldiers parachuted in alongside the dummies. They set up loudspeakers and blasted sounds of shouting officers, barking dogs, and heavy weapons. German reports were frantic. Dozens of paratroopers landing behind our lines. Heavy fighting. The 12th SS Panzer Division, one of the most formidable units near the beaches, went on a wild goose chase to hunt phantom paratroopers instead of reinforcing the coastline. While the German command panicked, rushing reserves to fight dummies, the real American and British paratroopers quietly captured bridges in Normandy with minimal losses. One German officer later admitted, "We were convinced we were facing an entire airborne division. We didn't discover the truth until we picked up one of the dolls." Part 4. Fake radio chatter. A real army never stops talking on a radio. And that chatter is chaotic, messy, full of swearing. If Patton's camp had gone silent, the Germans would have known it was fake. So operators from the 3,103rd Signal Service Battalion just filled the air. They imitated staff officers arguing, requests for fuel, fights about rations. They created entire fictional conversations about troop movements, supply shortages, and even a scandal involving a general's mistress, just to sound authentic. And here's the genius part. They imitated the operator's fist. Every telegraphist has a unique rhythm on the key, faster, slower, with pauses like a fingerprint made of Morse code. The Allied operators studied captured recordings of German radio operators and copied their fist exactly. The Germans listened and thought, those are the same guys we heard in Tunisia. So this division is real, not inflatable. Engineers also cheated with mud. Real tanks, which were scarce, would churn up a field, leaving deep tracks. Then they placed the rubber dummies right into those tracks. And to make the fake tanks leave more tracks, they invented a special trailer, a roller with real tank treads pulled by a jeep. Fake tanks leaving real footprints. Every detail mattered. As Captain Fred Fox wrote in the unit's official history, the adjustment from man of action to man of wile was most difficult. Few realized at first that one could spend just as much energy pretending to fight as actually fighting. Part 5. The result. Why it worked. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Normandy landings have begun. Hitler wakes up. His generals report. Mein Führer, the Allies have landed in Normandy. Hitler stares at the map, slams his fist, and shouts, "It's a diversion. Patton hasn't landed yet. Where's Patton?" German intelligence reports. Patton is still in Dover. Mein Führer. We see his tanks. We hear his radios. GARBO confirms this is just a feint. The real blow will come at Calais. And Hitler leaves the 15th Army exactly where it is. 7 panzer divisions. Over 300,000 men. Sitting, waiting, for an army that didn't exist. 2 weeks. 14 days after the largest amphibious invasion in human history, the Führer was still waiting for the main blow. German tank divisions that could have reached Normandy within 24 hours took nearly 2 weeks to arrive. When the German panzers finally moved toward the beaches, the Allies had already built a beachhead so deep that it couldn't be pushed back into the sea. The Americans and British had landed over 850,000 men. They had air superiority. They had artillery. The window for counterattack had slammed shut. Historians say, thanks to rubber tanks and phantom agents. The Germans lost the 2 most precious days of the entire campaign. SS Panzer divisions could have rolled onto Omaha Beach on the afternoon of June 6th. Instead, they arrived in late June. Without the artists and the Ruperts and a Spanish chicken farmer named GARBO, the beachhead would likely have been crushed. The cost of victory would have been hundreds of thousands more lives. As one German general later confessed, we were not defeated by superior force. We were defeated by superior illusion. Conclusion. After the war, the secret of the Ghost Army was kept quiet for nearly 50 years, until the 1990s. These soldiers were invisible. They signed non-disclosure agreements and kept their mouths shut for decades. Their wives had no idea what they'd really done in the war. Only 10 of the original 1,100 Ghost Army soldiers are believed to still be alive today. In February 2022, 77 years after the war ended, they finally received the Congressional Gold Medal, one of America's highest civilian honors. Future stars served in their ranks. Fashion designer Bill Blass learned his craft working with camouflage fabric. His wartime sketchbooks are now museum pieces. Artist Ellsworth Kelly created his first masterpieces painting inflatable tanks to match English grass. You can see the influence of his Ghost Army service in his post-war abstract paintings, the camouflage patterns, the sonic experiments, the hidden codes. The inflatable tanks are all gone now, destroyed or recycled after the war. But the techniques pioneered by the Ghost Army live on. Modern military deception in the Gulf War in Afghanistan still uses the playbook written by a handful of artists, set designers, and a Spanish chicken farmer. Patton's army was the largest toy army in history. It proved that war isn't just about bullets. It's theater. It's deception. And sometimes, to win World War II, you just need to let the air out of a tank. Do you think this kind of trick would work today with thousands of drones and spy satellites overhead? Or has war become too transparent for such illusions? Could a fake army fool a satellite? Let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. I am genuinely curious. If you want to hear another story about how artists, actors, and spies fooled the Nazis, hit like and subscribe. See you in the next episode.